For over a century, historians have told us that the First World War was a conflict defined by the machine. We were told it was the era where industrial might crushed the human spirit, where the individual soldier was reduced to a mere statistic in a war of attrition. We were taught that battles were decided by whoever had the most artillery shells, the thickest concrete, or the newest technology. We were told that when a specialized weapon, a wonder weapon, was deployed against an unprepared enemy, the result was a mathematical certainty: total annihilation. The weak die and the strong conquer. That is the accepted narrative of military history. We were told that the Eastern Front was a fluid, chaotic theater where the Russian Empire, crumbling under its own weight, was systematically dismantled by the superior engineering and discipline of the German war machine. We were told that the Osowiec Fortress, a relic of 19th century brick and mortar, was nothing more than a speed bump on the road to German dominance. But deep beneath the marshes of the Biebrza River, in what is now northeastern Poland, a 1915 discovery has shattered that story. It wasn't a standard military victory. It wasn't a battle of strategy or logistics. It was an event so horrifying, so psychologically breaking, that the German High Command tried to bury the reports for decades. It wasn't a battle between two armies. It was a collision between the laws of chemistry and the limits of the human soul. The story we are about to tell you does not appear in the standard high school textbooks. It is often dismissed as folklore or exaggerated wartime propaganda. But the forensic evidence, the regimental diaries, and the medical reports from August 1915 tell a different story. They tell us that 7,000 well-equipped, healthy German soldiers didn't flee because they were outgunned. They didn't flee because they were outmaneuvered. They fled because they saw something that their minds could not process. They fled because the enemy they were fighting had already died. And the clues have been hiding in plain sight since the year 1915. You can see it in the rusted gas canisters still found by local metal detectorists. You can see it in the scorched marks on the fortress walls, where the very air turned into acid. Today, we aren't just looking at history, we are rewriting the definition of human endurance. We are going back to the single most terrifying morning of the Great War to uncover why a modern army broke rank and ran in terror from a chaotic, bloody nightmare that should not have been possible. This is the story of the day the dead marched. To understand the sheer scale of this tragedy, we have to go back to the eve of the collapse. The year is 1915. The Great War is 1 year old, and the initial optimism of home by Christmas has rotted away in the trenches. The Russian Empire is teetering on the edge. The Great Retreat is underway. Russian forces are pulling back across the entire front, desperately trying to trade land for time. They are short on ammunition, short on rifles, and plagued by poor leadership. But there is one thorn in the German side that refuses to be plucked: the Osowiec Fortress. Strategically, Osowiec was a nightmare for the Germans. It was built in the middle of an impassable swamp. There were no roads for heavy German tanks or artillery to bypass it. If Germany wanted to push their trains and supplies deeper into Russia, they had to take the fortress. They had tried in September 1914. They failed. They tried again in February 1915. They failed. The fortress was small, outdated, and isolated, but the geography made it a perfect kill zone. By July 1915, the German High Command had had enough. Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg, the titan of the German army, decided that Osowiec would not just be defeated, it would be sterilized. He didn't just want a breach in the wall, he wanted to exterminate the garrison so that his troops could walk in without firing a shot. But in the shadows, the German 11th Landwehr Division was preparing a weapon that the world had rarely seen deployed with such concentrated malice. They brought in 30 heavy gas balloon batteries. This wasn't standard artillery. These were thousands of cylinders filled with a pressurized mixture of chlorine and bromine. The preparations were slow and methodical. For 10 agonizing days in late July and early August, the front was eerily quiet. The German meteorologists were the new commanders now. They were waiting for the perfect wind, a wind that would carry the death cloud gently over the Russian lines without blowing back into the German trenches. Contemporary scrolls and diaries from the Russian side describe a strange, suffocating phenomenon during these 10 days. The air was heavy. The birds, usually loud in the summer marshes, had gone silent. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath. Inside the fortress, the Russian defenders, mostly from the 226th Zemyansky Infantry Regiment, were exhausted. They knew something was coming. They saw the construction work in the German lines, but they had no gas masks. Let me repeat that. They had no gas masks. The Russian Empire had failed to equip them. Their only protection against chemical warfare was a primitive advice passed down from officers. Pee on a rag and wrap it around your face. The ammonia in the urine might neutralize some of the chlorine. That was their high-tech defense system. The warnings were there, the silence was there, but the Russian command ignored the signs, believing the swamp would save them one more time. They were wrong. That silence wasn't peace. It was the calm before the bloodiest storm in antiquity. The wind was about to change.
When the attack finally began at 4 a.m. on August 6th, it didn't happen as the movies show it. There was no dramatic whistle, no charge of cavalry. There was just a hissing sound. The Germans opened the valves on thousands of cylinders. A wall of dark green smog, estimated to be 40 feet high and miles wide, began to crawl across the no man's land. The chemistry of what happened next is crucial to understanding the horror. Chlorine gas is heavier than air. It didn't float away, it sank. It sank into the trenches. It sank into the dugouts. It hunted the men where they slept. As the cloud hit the Russian lines, the environment itself began to die. Leaves on the trees turned yellow and fell within minutes. The grass turned black and disintegrated. Any copper on the soldiers' uniforms, buttons, belt buckles, gun parts, immediately turned green as the chlorine oxidized the metal. And then it hit the men. It wasn't a glorious battle, it was a slaughterhouse. The 9th, 10th, and 11th companies were effectively wiped out instantly. Men clawed at their throats as the water in their lungs turned into hydrochloric acid. They were drowning on dry land. The German commander, confident that no living thing could survive the zone of death, ordered the advance. 7,000 German soldiers, equipping their own gas masks, began to march. They moved confidently. They expected to find only corpses. They expected to walk into the fortress, step over the bodies, and claim victory for the Kaiser. They breached the first line of defense. Silence. They breached the second line. Silence. But then, as they approached the shattered ruins of the fortress core, the ground shook. Not from thunder, but from the stumbling, erratic marching of what remained of the 13th Company. This is the moment history broke. Out of the green fog, roughly 60 men emerged, but they didn't look like men. They had chemical burns on their faces. They were wrapped in bloody, urine-soaked rags. They were coughing up blood and pieces of their own lung tissue. They were literally dying on their feet. Leading them was 2nd Lieutenant Vladimir Kotlinski. He shouldn't have been able to stand, let alone shout orders, but he did. Instead of surrendering, these 60 dying men charged. They had no machine guns left. They had no artillery support. They only had bayonets and a terrifying guttural rage. They couldn't scream hurrah because their vocal cords had dissolved. They made a sound that the German soldiers described as a terrible, wild wheezing. In a single hour, the German confidence evaporated. The 7,000 soldiers of the Landwehr Division froze. They looked at these figures emerging from the mist, figures that looked like demons rising from the grave, and a primal panic set in. This wasn't war. This was a nightmare. The German lines broke. They didn't just retreat, they routed. They dropped their machine guns. They ran over their own officers. They got tangled in their own barbed wire in a desperate attempt to escape the dead men. The hunters became the prey. For centuries, or at least for the decades that followed, this defeat was blamed on German confusion or bad intelligence. The German official reports tried to minimize the event, calling it a momentary setback due to unexpected resistance. But new forensic analysis of military medical records and the chemistry of 1915 chlorine gas tells a different story. It explains why the Germans ran. We have to look at this from a psychological and biological perspective. The German soldiers were told that the gas was 100% lethal. They were told that the enemy was dead. When you're mentally prepared to see corpses, and instead you see those corpses charging at you with bayonets, your brain suffers a cognitive break. Look at this image. This is a medical diagram of chlorine gas effects. When chlorine gas hits the water in your eyes, nose, and lungs, it creates acid. The soldiers charging the Germans were visually terrifying. Their skin would have been blue from lack of oxygen or peeling red from chemical burns. They would have been foaming at the mouth with bloody mucus. To the German conscripts, many of whom were older reservists in the Landwehr, this looked like the supernatural. Furthermore, forensic historians have analyzed the layout of the fortress ruins today. The pattern of the German retreat shows absolute chaos. We find German equipment abandoned in areas that suggest they were running away from the fortress, trampling each other in the narrow causeways of the swamp. This suggests that the German commander didn't lose because of incompetence. He lost because he was fighting a war he didn't know had already started: psychological warfare. The dead men didn't win with bullets. They won because they stripped the Germans of their humanity. They forced the Germans to confront a level of suffering and determination that defied logic. The lost evidence is not a physical object. It is the realization that the human will to survive and protect one's home is stronger than chemical weaponry. Lieutenant Kotlinski, the man who led the charge, died later that evening. His lungs were destroyed. But before he died, he wrote a final report. He didn't brag. He simply stated the position was held. He died knowing that 60 men had scared an empire.
So, what really happened to the dead men? The tragic reality is that they didn't survive long. Most of the 60 men who charged died within days or weeks from the severe lung damage. The fortress itself was evacuated just weeks later. The Russians demolished the walls they had defended so fiercely, retreating before the Germans could return. In the grand scope of the war, the battle changed little on the map. The Germans eventually took the land. But the truth might be stranger and more powerful than fiction. They didn't disappear into obscurity. They merged into legend. For decades, the story was suppressed in the West, and even in the Soviet Union, it was often treated as a minor footnote. But recently, with the release of metal songs and video games featuring the battle, the attack of the dead men has resurfaced. Why? Why does this story resonate with us 100 years later? Because it terrifies us, and it inspires us. It reminds us that we don't know the limits of our own bodies. It reminds us that when all hope is lost, when the technology of the enemy is insurmountable, and when death is a certainty, the human spirit can still choose how it ends. They didn't choose to die in the bottom of a trench gasping for air.
They chose to die on their feet, facing the enemy. Their bloodline and their influence might not be found in modern institutions, but it is hidden in the military doctrine of fighting to the last man. It is a warning to every aggressor who thinks that technology guarantees victory. History is written by the victors. The Germans wrote the after-action reports. The Russians wrote the retreat orders. But the Earth remembers the day the dead stood up. This is History Chronicle, and the past is never dead.